I had never imagined that a single moment could tear my life apart.
But there I was, standing in the doorway of our bedroom, watching as my wife, Lauren, tangled herself in the sheets with another man. The sight hit me like a punch to the gut. My breath caught in my throat, and my chest tightened with a pain I hadn't known I was capable of feeling.
I didn't recognize him at first.
It took me a moment, and then the pieces fell into place.
The tousled brown hair, the lean, athletic build.
The half-finished painting on the easel in the corner.
It was Lucas Montgomery, an artist whose work had been gaining traction in the city's galleries, a name I'd heard in passing from Lauren's friends. He was everything I wasn't, free-spirited, passionate, unbound by the rigid structures that defined my world of architecture.
My first instinct was to storm in, to shout, to drag him out of my house and make him pay for this betrayal.
But something held me back.
A quiet, simmering anger settled in my chest, quelling the initial urge to react. I knew I couldn't afford to lose control. Not yet.
Lauren hadn't noticed me. She was too caught up in the moment, too consumed by her passion for this man who was not her husband. I backed out of the room silently, my heart pounding in my ears. I needed to think, to plan.
This wasn't just a betrayal of our marriage, it was a challenge, and I wasn't about to let them win.
As I drove through the city that evening, the streets blurred together in a haze of anger and disbelief. My mind raced, replaying the scene over and over until it became a twisted loop of pain and humiliation. How had I missed the signs? How had I been so blind? But beneath the hurt, a cold, calculating part of me began to take over. I was an architect, after all. I built things for a living, plans, structures, entire worlds. If Lucas thought he could come into my life and tear down what I'd built, he was sorely mistaken. By the time I reached the office, the initial shock had worn off, replaced by a grim determination. I knew what I had to do. Lucas had chosen the wrong man to cross, and Lauren, well, she had no idea what she had set in motion. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I was looking for. Jessica Montgomery, Lucas's wife. We had met once, briefly, at a gallery opening, and I remembered the way she had looked at him, with a mixture of pride and something else, something I could now recognize as desperation. I hesitated for just a moment before pressing the call button. The line rang twice before she picked up, her voice tinged with curiosity. "Jason? This is a surprise." "Jessica," I began, forcing calm into my voice. "I think we need to talk." "There's something you need to know." The days that followed were a study in control. I moved through my routine as if nothing had changed, all the while harboring the secret knowledge of Lauren's betrayal. At work, my colleagues saw the same composed, methodical Jason they always had. No one suspected the storm brewing beneath the surface. But at home, things were different. Lauren seemed oblivious to the fact that I knew. She went about her life, continuing her affair with Lucas in the shadows, believing that her deception was well hidden. It sickened me to see her smile at me, to kiss me goodnight as if nothing was wrong. But I played along, my own mask firmly in place. Every touch, every word from her was a lie, and each one only strengthened my resolve. Jessica, on the other hand, was not so naive. When we met for coffee that afternoon, I could see the tension in her eyes, the subtle lines of stress etched into her face. She was a beautiful woman, no doubt, but there was something weary about her, as if life with Lucas had worn her down. She stirred her coffee absently, her eyes searching mine for answers I wasn't ready to give just yet. "Jason, what is this about? You said it was important." I took a moment before responding, choosing my words carefully. "I know about Lucas and Lauren," I said quietly, watching as her hand froze on the handle of her cup. "I know about the affair." The color drained from her face, and she set the cup down, her hands trembling slightly. How did you find out?" "That doesn't matter," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "What matters is what we're going to do about it." Jessica looked at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and fear. "Do about it?
What do you mean?
I leaned in closer, lowering my voice. Lucas has crossed a line, and I'm not the kind of man who lets things like this slide. But I don't want to confront him head on. That would be too easy, too quick. I want to hit him where it hurts the most, his career, his reputation. And I need your help to do it. For a moment, she just stared at me, as if trying to gauge whether I was serious.
Then, slowly, she nodded, her expression hardening.
You want to ruin him? I want to make sure he feels the consequences of his actions, I corrected her. Lucas thinks he can live his life without repercussions, but that's not how the world works. You and I both know that. And if we work together, we can bring him down in a way that he'll never see coming.
Jessica was silent for a long time, her eyes distant as she processed what I was saying.
Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. And what about Lauren?
The question caught me off guard, but I didn't let it show.
Lauren made her choice, I said coldly.
She'll have to live with the consequences of that, just like Lucas.
Jessica nodded again, more firmly this time. All right.
What's the plan?
I allowed myself a small smile. First, we need to make sure Lucas's gallery starts to fail. We'll create problems with his suppliers, delay shipments, cause mix-ups with his orders. I have some connections in the industry, people who owe me favors. I'll make the calls.
Once the gallery is struggling, we'll start spreading rumors, casting doubt on his talent, his integrity.
The art world is small, Jessica. It won't take much to ruin him. She listened carefully, her expression unreadable.
And my role in this?
I'll need you to sabotage him from the inside, I said. You're close to him, closer than anyone else.
You can make sure things go wrong, that deals fall through, that his confidence starts to crumble.
He trusts you, Jessica. Use that to our advantage. For a moment, she hesitated, then she looked up at me with a steely determination. I'll do it. He deserves to be punished for what he's done. But I want something in return. I raised an eyebrow. Name it. When this is all over. She said, her voice firm, I want to be free of him. I want to build something of my own, without his shadow hanging over me.
You said you have connections. Help me establish myself in the art world, and I'll do whatever it takes to bring Lucas down.
I leaned back in my chair, considering her request. It was a fair trade.
You have my word. When this is done, you'll have the freedom and the recognition you deserve.
Jessica smiled,
a cold, calculating smile that mirrored my own.
Then let's get to work. As we parted ways that afternoon, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. The wheels were in motion, and soon Lucas would see just how dangerous it was to cross me.
This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about control, about showing Lauren, Lucas, and even myself that I was the one who held the power.
They thought they could play with my life, my emotions, and get away with it.
But they were wrong. The days turned into weeks, and my plan began to take shape.
Jessica proved to be a valuable ally, determined, resourceful, and willing to go to great lengths to see Lucas suffer.
As we orchestrated the first stages of our plan, I marveled at how seamlessly everything was falling into place.
I started with a few well-timed phone calls to some of my contacts in the art world. These were people who owed me favors, people whose careers I had helped build in one way or another. I knew they wouldn't hesitate to return the favor, especially when the task seemed so innocuous on the surface. Delayed shipments, lost orders, and sudden, technical issues, with Lucas's upcoming exhibitions. Each move was carefully calculated to erode his confidence and disrupt his gallery's operations. Jessica played her part flawlessly. She knew the ins and outs of Lucas's business, the vulnerabilities he would never suspect she might exploit. With her help, we introduced chaos into his world, a series of seemingly random setbacks that left Lucas scrambling for solutions. He had no idea that the source of his troubles was sitting right beside him, smiling and offering words of comfort as his gallery began to fall apart. I remember the first time Jessica told me about Lucas's frustration.
We met in a quiet corner of a small cafe, far from the prying eyes of the social circles we both moved in. She arrived looking weary, but there was a spark of satisfaction in her eyes that told me she was enjoying this as much as I was.
"He's losing it, Jason," she said, stirring her tea with a slow, deliberate motion. "The gallery's been hit with so many issues that he's starting to question everything. He keeps saying it's like the universe is conspiring against him." I couldn't help but smile at that. Good. The more he doubts himself, the easier it will be to take him down completely. Jessica nodded, her expression growing serious. "But we need to be careful. He's starting to suspect that something isn't right. I've noticed him checking emails, making phone calls late at night. He's trying to find the source of the problems." I leaned back in my chair, considering her words. "We need to stay ahead of him. Make sure there's nothing that ties this back to either of us. Keep feeding him just enough hope that he thinks he can turn things around, but never let him fully succeed." She looked at me, a hint of concern in her eyes. "What about Lauren? Has she noticed anything?" Lauren. The name felt like a knife twisting in my gut, but I pushed the emotion aside. She's too wrapped up in her affair to notice much of anything. As far as she's concerned, I'm just busy with work. She hasn't a clue what's really going on. Jessica sighed, a weary sound that spoke of her own emotional exhaustion. "This is taking a toll on both of us, Jason. I just want to make sure we're doing the right thing." I met her gaze, my voice firm. "We're doing what needs to be done. Lucas and Lauren chose this path when they betrayed us. Now, we're just making sure they face the consequences." She didn't reply right away, but I could see the resolve in her eyes. Jessica was committed, just as I was, and I knew she wouldn't back out now. We were too deep into this, too close to achieving our goal. As we parted ways that day, I felt a sense of satisfaction that had eluded me for weeks. Lucas was unraveling, his gallery teetering on the edge of collapse, and soon, the rest of his world would follow. Yet, amidst the success, there was a quiet voice in the back of my mind, whispering questions I wasn't ready to answer. What would happen when it was all over? When Lucas was destroyed, and Lauren was left with nothing but the wreckage of her choices? Would I feel the peace I sought? Or would the void in my heart remain, untouched by revenge? I shook off the thoughts, focusing on the task at hand. There was no room for doubt, not now. The next phase of the plan was critical, and it required precision, timing, and a ruthless commitment to the endgame. I wasn't just building their downfall. I was crafting it, piece by piece, with the same care and attention I'd put into any of my architectural masterpieces. And when it was finished, Lucas and Lauren would stand amid the ruins of their own making, while I watched from a distance, unscathed and in control. As Lucas's gallery continued its downward spiral, the cracks in his life began to widen. The once vibrant and confident artist was now a shadow of his former self, his frustration growing with each passing day. I kept close tabs on his progress, or lack thereof, through Jessica, who provided me with regular updates on his deteriorating state. It was all going according to plan, but I knew we were approaching a critical juncture. It was time to escalate. The gallery had already suffered delays and setbacks, but it was still holding on by a thread. Lucas, ever the optimist, had managed to secure a new exhibition, a lifeline that he believed would turn everything around. It was a high-profile event, one that would attract key players in the art world. If successful, it could restore his reputation and breathe new life into his career. But I couldn't allow that to happen. I made a few more calls, pulling strings to ensure that this exhibition would be his undoing. I arranged for some of the most influential critics to attend, critics who had no tolerance for mediocrity. With Jessica's help, we ensured that the gallery was plagued with technical difficulties on the day of the exhibition, lighting issues, misplaced artwork, and last-minute cancellations from important guests. The night of the exhibition, I watched from a distance, mingling with the crowd just enough to stay unnoticed. The atmosphere in the gallery was tense, a far cry from the lively, buzzing events that had once defined Lucas's career. The lighting was too dim, casting the art in shadows that failed to capture the vibrancy of the pieces. The guests were visibly uncomfortable, whispering among themselves as they walked through the space, their expressions ranging from confusion to disappointment. I spotted Lucas near the center of the room, frantically moving from one guest to another, trying to salvage what was quickly turning into a disaster. His face was flushed, his movements erratic as he attempted to explain away the myriad of issues that plagued the event. But the damage was done. The critics' faces were unreadable, but I knew what their reviews would say before the night was over. At the edge of the room, I saw Jessica. She had done her part perfectly, playing the supportive wife while subtly nudging the situation further into chaos. Our eyes met briefly across the gallery, and she gave me the slightest nod, a silent confirmation that everything was proceeding as planned. As the night wore on, I saw Lucas's confidence crumble. The man who had once been the center of attention at these events was now barely holding it together, his voice cracking as he tried to engage the disinterested critics. It was painful to watch, and I relished every moment of it. I approached Lucas when the crowd had thinned out, offering him a sympathetic smile. "Tough night, huh?" He looked at me, his eyes hollow, the weight of the evening pressing down on him. "You could say that," he muttered. "Nothing's gone right tonight. I don't know how this happened." I shrugged, feigning concern. "These things happen, Lucas. Sometimes the universe just doesn't cooperate." He gave a bitter laugh, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "Yeah, it feels like that. It's just, everything's falling apart, Jason. The gallery, my work, even my marriage." His voice trailed off, and he looked down, ashamed of the admission. I kept my expression neutral, hiding the satisfaction that welled up inside me. "I'm sure it's just a rough patch," I said, clapping him on the shoulder. "You'll bounce back. You always do." Lucas nodded, but his eyes were distant, lost in his own thoughts. "Maybe. I don't know anymore." As I walked away, I felt a cold thrill run through me. Lucas was on the edge, teetering on the brink of collapse. But this was only the beginning. The real blow would come soon, when he realized just how deep the betrayal ran. Back at home, I found Lauren waiting for me. She was sitting on the couch, her legs tucked under her, flipping through a magazine without really reading it. She looked up as I entered, giving me a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You're home late," she said, her voice casual but with an undercurrent of tension. "Long day at the office," I replied, loosening my tie as I sat down across from her. "How was your day?" "Fine," she said, too quickly. "Just the usual." The silence that followed was heavy, filled with everything we weren't saying. I could see the unease in her eyes, the guilt that she tried so hard to hide. She must have sensed that something was wrong, that our lives were slowly unraveling, but she didn't know why. "Not yet." I leaned back, watching her carefully. "You know, I've been thinking. Maybe we should take a break. Go on a trip somewhere, just the two of us. It's been a while since we had time to ourselves." Lauren looked surprised, caught off guard by the suggestion. "A trip? Where would we go?" "Anywhere you want," I said, smiling at her. "Just you and me, away from everything here. We could use the time to reconnect, don't you think?" For a moment, she hesitated, and I saw a flicker of hope in her eyes. She wanted to believe that everything could go back to the way it was, that we could somehow salvage what was left of our marriage. "Yeah," she finally said, her voice soft. "That sounds nice." But I knew better. This was just another part of the plan, another way to keep her close, to ensure that she remained oblivious to the storm that was about to consume her and Lucas. As I went to bed that night, I felt the tension in my body begin to ease. The pressure on Lucas was mounting, and soon, everything he had built would come crashing down. And when it did, Lauren would have no one to turn to but me, the man who had orchestrated it all, the one who had never truly lost control. They thought they could play with my life, my emotions, without consequence.
But they were wrong.
And soon, they would realize just how wrong they were. The trip with Lauren was a carefully calculated move.
A chance to put the final pieces of my plan in place while giving her a false sense of security. I chose a secluded, luxurious resort in the mountains, somewhere quiet, away from the city, where we could pretend, just for a little while, that everything was fine.
It was an illusion, of course, but one that served its purpose well.
As we drove up the winding roads, the tension that had lingered between us for weeks seemed to melt away.
Lauren was unusually relaxed, laughing at my jokes,
reaching for my hand as we navigated the narrow paths. It was almost as if she believed we could leave our problems behind us, that a change of scenery could erase the damage that had been done.
The resort was everything I had promised.
Elegant, serene, a place where time seemed to stand still.
Our suite overlooked a pristine lake, the water shimmering in the late afternoon sun. Lauren stood by the window, her eyes wide with wonder, as if she couldn't believe we were really here.
"It's beautiful, Jason," she said, turning to me with a genuine smile. "Thank you for this."
I walked up behind her, slipping my arms around her waist as I gazed out at the view. "You're welcome. We needed this, some time away from everything, just the two of us."
She leaned back against me, and for a moment, we stood there in silence, the warmth of her body against mine a reminder of how things used to be.
It was tempting to let myself believe that we could find our way back to that place, that we could heal the rift that had torn us apart.
But I knew better. This trip wasn't about reconciliation. It was about control, about keeping Lauren close as the final stage of my plan unfolded. The first night, we dined in the resort's private restaurant, a cozy space with low lighting and a roaring fire in the hearth. The atmosphere was intimate, the kind of place where secrets were shared and promises were made.
Lauren looked stunning in a simple black dress, her hair falling in soft waves around her shoulders. She was the picture of elegance. And for a moment, I almost felt a pang of regret for what was to come. But I pushed the thought aside, focusing on the task at hand. Over dinner, I kept the conversation light, steering clear of anything that might remind us of the turmoil back home. We talked about the future, about plans we had made years ago but never followed through on. Lauren seemed genuinely engaged, her laughter filling the room as we reminisced about the early days of our marriage. It was all an act, of course. I was playing the part of the devoted husband, making her believe that this trip was the beginning of something new.
But in reality, it was the beginning of the end.
On the second day, I made an excuse to leave the resort, telling Lauren that I needed to take care of some business. She didn't question it. By now, she was used to my unpredictable schedule. As I drove back down the mountain, I could feel the anticipation building within me. The final move was in motion, and there was no turning back. I met with Jessica in a small cafe in the nearby town. She looked different, more confident, more determined than the woman I had first approached weeks ago.
The events of the past few days had changed her, hardened her in a way that I hadn't expected.
"Is everything in place?" I asked, skipping the pleasantries.
Jessica nodded, her expression serious.
"Lucas is on edge. He's been trying to salvage the gallery, but nothing's working. He knows something's wrong, but he can't figure out what. The rumors have started spreading, people are talking, questioning his talent, his decisions. He's desperate, Jason. He's even started talking about selling the gallery, just to get out from under the pressure." I smiled, satisfied. "Good.
That's exactly what we want."
But we're not done yet. There's one more thing we need to do."
Jessica leaned in, her eyes narrowing. "What is it?"
"I need you to plant the final seed of doubt," I said, my voice low. "Lucas needs to believe that Lauren has turned on him.
That she's the one responsible for his downfall. If he thinks she's betrayed him, it will destroy him completely." Jessica hesitated, her expression faltering.
That's a dangerous move, Jason. If he finds out the truth." "He won't," I interrupted, my tone sharp. "Lucas is already unstable.
Once he believes that Lauren has turned against him, he'll spiral out of control.
And when he does, the gallery will collapse, and his reputation will be in ruins. This is the final step.
Jessica. After this, it's over.
She nodded slowly, understanding the gravity of what I was asking. All right. I'll do it.
But after this, I want out. I've done everything you asked, and I'm ready to move on.
You have my word, I said, meeting her gaze.
When this is over, you'll be free. We parted ways, and I drove back to the resort, my mind racing with the possibilities of what was to come.
The pieces were all in place, and soon, Lucas would find himself standing in the middle of the wreckage,
with nothing left to hold on to. That evening, I returned to Lauren with a renewed sense of purpose.
We spent the night by the fire, sipping wine and talking late into the night. She was more relaxed than I had seen her in months, her guard completely down.
As I watched her, I felt a strange mixture of emotions, satisfaction, anticipation, and something else that I couldn't quite name.
But I pushed it aside, focusing on the plan. The next morning, I suggested a walk around the lake. Lauren agreed eagerly, slipping her hand into mine as we made our way down the winding path. The air was crisp and cool, the sky a perfect blue. It was the kind of day that made you forget about the world's troubles, if only for a little while.
But as we walked, I couldn't help but think about what was coming. By the time we returned to the city, Lucas's life would be in shambles, and Lauren would be left to pick up the pieces of a world she had helped destroy.
And I would be there, watching it all unfold, knowing that I had been the architect of their downfall.
The days that followed were a blur of anticipation and cold satisfaction.
I had returned from the trip with Lauren, and as we settled back into our routine, the final stage of my plan began to take shape.
The resort had been a temporary respite, but now it was time to face the fallout of our actions. Jessica had executed her part with precision.
Lucas was unraveling, and his gallery was on the brink of collapse. The rumors were spreading like wildfire, fueled by anonymous tips and carefully planted doubts. Jessica's role in the charade had been flawless. She had convinced Lucas that Lauren was behind the sabotage, planting seeds of suspicion that grew into a full-blown paranoia. Lucas's desperation reached a fever pitch. He was now convinced that Lauren was orchestrating the problems with the gallery, feeding the press negative information, and undermining his reputation. It was exactly what I had hoped for. Lucas was on the edge, and all it would take was a final push to send him over. I arranged a private meeting with Jessica in the dimly lit back room of a downtown cafe. Her expression was tense, the strain of the past few weeks evident in the tight lines of her face. "Is it done?" I asked, leaning forward in my seat. Jessica nodded, her eyes hard. Lucas is completely convinced that Lauren is trying to ruin him. He's already started distancing himself from her, both personally and professionally. He's even considered selling the gallery, but it's too late for that now. The damage has been done. Good, I said, feeling a chill of satisfaction. How's the fallout from the critics? The reviews are brutal, Jessica replied. They're calling his work derivative and unoriginal. The negative press is causing his buyers to pull out. The gallery's future is in serious jeopardy. I took a deep breath, letting the weight of the situation settle over me. This was the moment I had been working toward, the culmination of all my efforts. Lucas was on the brink of complete and utter ruin. And Lauren was about to experience the fallout of her betrayal. As I left the cafe, I couldn't help but feel a sense of cold triumph. The plan had worked, and soon, everything Lucas had built would come crashing down. But the victory was bittersweet. There was no joy in seeing someone's life fall apart, no real satisfaction in their suffering. It was just the end result of a carefully executed strategy, and soon, it would be over. Later that week, I arranged a dinner at a high-end restaurant, inviting Lauren to join me. I wanted to ensure that she was in the best possible position to witness the full impact of the chaos I had set in motion.
The evening was supposed to be a celebration, a moment of triumph masked by the veneer of normalcy.
Lauren arrived looking radiant, her dress a deep shade of crimson that made her stand out in the crowded dining room. She smiled warmly as she slid into the seat opposite me, clearly enjoying the evening. "This place is amazing, Jason," she said, looking around at the elegant surroundings. "I had no idea you had this planned." I smiled, raising my glass in a toast. "To us," I said. "To everything we've accomplished." We clinked glasses, and Lauren took a sip of her wine, her eyes sparkling with anticipation. It was then that I decided to reveal the final piece of the puzzle. I had arranged for the evening's conversation to subtly steer toward the downfall of Lucas and his gallery, ensuring that Lauren would be fully aware of the consequences of her actions.
"You know," I said casually, as we enjoyed our meal, "I heard some interesting news today."
Lucas's gallery is practically finished. The critics are tearing him apart, and his investors are pulling out. It's only a matter of time before he's out of the art world for good. Lauren's fork paused midair, and she looked at me with a mixture of surprise and concern. "Really? I hadn't heard that." I leaned in, my voice low and deliberate. "Yes.
It's all coming apart for him. And you know what?
I think he's even starting to suspect that you're behind it." Lauren's eyes widened, and she set her fork down, her hands trembling slightly.
"Me? Why would he think that?"
"I don't know," I said, feigning ignorance. "But it seems that the rumors are really getting to him. He's convinced that someone close to him is sabotaging his career." Lauren's face turned pale, and she looked down at her plate, her mind racing. I had no idea. I thought things were just going badly for him. I didn't know it was this serious." I watched her closely, noting the fear and guilt that were starting to surface.
This was what I had wanted, to see her face the consequences of her actions, to feel the weight of her betrayal as it pressed down on her. As the evening drew to a close, I drove Lauren back to our home, the silence in the car heavy with unspoken words.
She was lost in thought, her mind clearly preoccupied with the news I had just shared. I could see the strain in her face, the dawning realization that the world she had been so comfortable in was starting to crumble. When we arrived home, Lauren took a deep breath and turned to me, her eyes filled with a mix of determination and fear. "Jason, we need to talk." I nodded, my expression neutral. "Of course. What's on your mind?" Lauren hesitated, then took a step closer. "I don't know what's happening, but I want to fix it. I want to help Lucas, to make things right." I could see the desperation in her eyes, the fear of losing everything she had taken for granted.
And for a moment, I almost felt a pang of sympathy.
But then I remembered the plan.
The carefully constructed revenge that had brought us to this point.
"We'll talk about it," I said, my voice steady. "But for now, you should get some rest."
"We have a lot to think about."
Lauren nodded, her shoulders slumping as she walked toward the bedroom. I watched her go, a sense of finality settling over me.
The stage was set, and soon, everything would come to a head.
Lucas's downfall was nearly complete, and the repercussions of Lauren's betrayal were just beginning to unfold. As I prepared for the final act, I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and emptiness. The plan was working, but the cost was high.
And as I looked out at the night sky, I wondered what the future would hold once all was said and done. The days following that tense dinner with Lauren were marked by an eerie calm. She was distant, lost in her thoughts, and I could see the toll that the news about Lucas's downfall was taking on her.
The guilt and fear gnawed at her, eroding the facade of confidence she had once worn so effortlessly. It was only a matter of time before everything she had built on the foundation of her betrayal came crashing down. Meanwhile, I continued to play my part, pretending to be the supportive husband while subtly pushing her toward the edge. Every now and then, I would drop another hint about Lucas's deteriorating situation, just enough to keep her on edge without revealing the full extent of what I had done. The tension in the house grew with each passing day, and I could see the cracks in Lauren's composure widening.
It was on a Thursday evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, that the final blow was struck.
I had just returned home from a meeting, and as I stepped inside, I found Lauren sitting at the kitchen table, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. She looked up at me with wide, panicked eyes, her face pale as a ghost. "Jason," she whispered, her voice trembling. I just got a message from Lucas." I felt a surge of anticipation but kept my expression neutral as I set my briefcase down.
"What did he say?"
She swallowed hard, her hands shaking as she handed me the phone. He thinks I'm responsible for everything. For the gallery's collapse, for the rumors. He says he knows I've been working against him."
I took the phone from her, my heart pounding in my chest as I read the message.
Lucas's words were filled with anger and betrayal, accusing Lauren of conspiring against him, of being the one who had orchestrated his ruin. He had connected the dots, but not in the way he should have. He believed that Lauren, the woman he had trusted, was the architect of his downfall. "I don't understand," Lauren said, her voice barely above a whisper.
"Why would he think that?"
"I've done nothing but support him."
"How could he believe I would do something like this?"
I looked at her, taking in the fear and confusion in her eyes. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the point of no return. I had planned for this, orchestrated every detail to ensure that Lucas would blame Lauren for everything. And now, it was all falling into place. "I'm not sure," I said slowly, carefully choosing my words. "But Lucas is clearly desperate. He's grasping at straws, trying to find someone to blame. And it looks like he's convinced himself that you're the one behind it all." Lauren shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes.
"But I didn't do anything, Jason. I swear, I didn't."
"He's wrong.
He has to be wrong."
I reached out, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "I believe you, Lauren. But Lucas is in a bad place right now. He's losing everything, and when people are that desperate, they'll do anything to protect themselves. Even if it means blaming the wrong person."
She looked at me, her eyes searching mine for answers, for some way to make sense of the chaos that had engulfed her life. "What do I do? How do I fix this?"
I paused, letting the silence stretch out between us, before finally speaking. "Maybe it's time to step away, Lauren. From Lucas, from the gallery, from everything.
Let it all fall apart. You don't need to be a part of this anymore."
Her eyes widened, and I could see the realization dawning on her. She had been clinging to the idea that she could somehow salvage the situation, that she could repair the damage and make things right.
But now, faced with the reality of Lucas's accusations and the impossibility of clearing her name, she understood the truth. There was no fixing this.
"But I don't want to leave him like this," she said, her voice breaking.
"He's in so much pain. I can't just abandon him."
I squeezed her shoulder, leaning in closer. "Sometimes, the best thing you can do is walk away. Let him deal with the consequences of his actions. You've done all you can, Lauren.
It's time to think about yourself."
She hesitated, her resolve wavering, but finally nodded, the fight draining out of her.
"Maybe you're right," she whispered.
"Maybe it's time to let go." I stood up, feeling a sense of finality wash over me. The plan was complete. Lucas had been destroyed, his career in ruins, and now Lauren was on the brink of walking away from it all.
The pieces had fallen into place perfectly, and soon, I would have everything I had worked for. But as I watched Lauren sitting there, defeated and broken, I couldn't help but feel a pang of something. Guilt, perhaps, or maybe regret.
She was just as much a victim as Lucas, caught in the crossfire of a game she never truly understood. "Let's take a break," I suggested gently. "Get out of the city for a few days. Clear our heads. We can decide what to do next when we're not in the middle of all this." She looked up at me, her expression weary but grateful.
"That sounds like a good idea," she said softly.
"I could use some time away." I smiled, nodding. "I'll make the arrangements. We'll leave tomorrow."
As I walked away, heading upstairs to pack, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted within me.
The satisfaction I had anticipated, the sense of victory, was nowhere to be found.
Instead, there was only a hollow emptiness, a realization that in destroying Lucas and breaking Lauren, I had also destroyed something within myself. But there was no turning back now. The plan was in motion, and the final unraveling had begun. All that was left was to watch it play out and see where the pieces would fall. The weekend retreat was supposed to be a reprieve, a moment to clear our heads and step back from the chaos.
We rented a small cabin by a quiet lake, far removed from the noise and tension of the city. Lauren was quiet the entire drive up, her thoughts clearly tangled in the web of guilt and confusion that had ensnared her. I, on the other hand, kept up the pretense of concern, pretending to be the supportive husband while internally steeling myself for the next step. The first evening passed uneventfully. We sat by the fire, sipping wine, making small talk that felt forced and artificial. Lauren was distracted, her mind clearly elsewhere, but I let it be, knowing that soon enough, everything would come to a head. The following morning, as we walked along the shore of the lake, the sun glistening off the calm water, the inevitable confrontation finally erupted.
"Jason," Lauren began, her voice tentative, "I've been thinking a lot about everything that's happened."
About Lucas, the gallery, everything. I kept my gaze on the horizon, sensing what was coming. "And what have you concluded?" She stopped walking, turning to face me. There was a determination in her eyes, mixed with fear. "I think I've made a terrible mistake. I've been so caught up in trying to help Lucas that I didn't see how much damage I was causing, to him, to us, to our marriage. I was wrong to get involved with him in the first place, and now it's all falling apart." I turned to look at her, keeping my expression neutral.
"So what are you saying?"
"I'm saying that I want to fix things," she said, her voice trembling. "I want to make it right with you, with our marriage. I was wrong, Jason. I should have never let it get this far." I felt a cold anger rise within me.
But I kept it in check. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment where she would finally admit her mistakes, where she would try to salvage what was left.
But it was too late for that.
"Do you really think it's that simple?"
I asked, my tone sharper than I intended.
"Do you think you can just walk away from Lucas, and everything will go back to the way it was?"
Lauren flinched at my words, the guilt evident in her eyes. "No, I know it's not that simple. But I'm willing to do whatever it takes to fix things between us. I don't want to lose you, Jason. I love you." Her words hung in the air between us, the weight of them pressing down on me.
This was the confession I had anticipated, but now that it was here, it felt hollow, empty.
"Love?" I repeated, my voice cold. "You think you love me after everything you've done?"
"After betraying me with him?"
Tears welled up in her eyes, and she shook her head, struggling to find the words. "It wasn't love, Jason.
It was a mistake, a horrible mistake.
I got caught up in the excitement. The passion, but it wasn't real. You're the one I want to be with." I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh against the stillness of the morning. "And what about Lucas? Do you think he'll just let you walk away after everything that's happened?
After you helped destroy his career, his life?"
She stared at me, confusion and fear flickering across her face.
"I didn't destroy him, Jason."
"I swear, I didn't." "But he thinks you did," I cut her off, my voice rising. "And now, he's going to come after you. Do you understand that? He's lost everything, and he's desperate. And you're the one he's blaming." Lauren's face went pale, the gravity of the situation finally sinking in. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I just wanted to help him."
"Help him?"
I snapped, the anger I had been holding back finally breaking free. "You ruined him, Lauren. You and your affair, your lies, your deceit. You destroyed everything." She stumbled back, as if my words had physically struck her. Tears streamed down her face, and she shook her head, denial written all over her features. "No, Jason, please. I didn't mean to. I didn't know."
The raw emotion in her voice, the desperate plea for forgiveness, might have swayed me once, but now it only fueled my resolve. This was the reckoning she deserved, the culmination of her betrayal.
Lucas is going to come after you, I said, my voice low and menacing. And when he does, there will be nothing left for you. No gallery, no career, no reputation. And you'll have no one to blame but yourself. Lauren collapsed to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably, her hands covering her face.
The sight of her, broken and defeated, should have brought me some sense of satisfaction, some measure of closure. But all I felt was an overwhelming emptiness, a hollow ache that refused to be filled.
I stood there for a moment, watching her cry, before finally turning away. There was nothing more to say. Nothing more to do.
The plan had been executed flawlessly, and now, all that remained was the wreckage of our lives. As I walked back toward the cabin, the weight of my actions settled heavily on my shoulders. The revenge I had sought, the destruction I had wrought, had come at a cost.
And in that moment, I realized that the price was far higher than I had ever anticipated. The final unraveling was complete, but the victory felt hollow, the triumph tainted by the pain and suffering I had caused. And as I stood at the edge of the lake, staring out at the calm waters, I couldn't help but wonder if I had truly won, or if I had lost everything in the process. Returning to the cabin, I found Lauren sitting on the edge of the bed, still wiping away the remnants of her tears. The rawness of the earlier confrontation lingered in the air like a dark cloud, suffocating and inescapable. I steeled myself for the conversation that would follow, knowing that the road we were on had only one possible destination.
But then, something unexpected happened, something that threw my carefully laid plans into disarray.
My phone buzzed on the nightstand, breaking the heavy silence. I ignored it at first, focusing instead on Lauren, who looked up at me with those red-rimmed eyes that were a mix of despair and silent pleading. But the phone buzzed again, more insistently this time, and I felt a pang of annoyance.
"Who is it?"
Lauren asked, her voice hoarse. I reached for the phone, expecting it to be another message related to work or perhaps another desperate attempt from Lucas to lash out.
Instead, I saw the name on the screen and felt my heart skip a beat.
It was Sara. My mind raced.
Why was she calling me now? We had agreed to lay low, to let things play out before making our next move.
I hesitated for a moment before answering, stepping out onto the cabin's small porch for some privacy.
"Sara?" I said cautiously.
"What's going on?" "Jason, something's happened," she replied, her voice tight with urgency.
"I just got a call from Lucas. He knows everything."
For a moment, I couldn't speak.
The air around me seemed to freeze as I tried to process her words. "What do you mean, he knows everything?"
"Everything," she repeated, her voice trembling. "He knows about us, about our plan to ruin his gallery. He knows you were behind the leaks, the rumors, everything." My mind reeled as the pieces fell into place. Lucas had somehow pieced together the truth, not just about Lauren's supposed betrayal but about the entire scheme Sara and I had orchestrated. The very plan that had been so carefully executed was now unraveling before my eyes.
"How?" I demanded, my voice rising in panic. "How could he possibly know?"
"I don't know," Sara said, her voice barely above a whisper.
"But he does.
He's threatening to expose us, to go public with everything. Jason, if he does that, we're finished." I could feel the walls closing in around me, the control I had so meticulously maintained slipping away. Everything I had done to destroy Lucas was now backfiring in the most catastrophic way possible. If he went public with this, it wouldn't just ruin him, it would ruin me too. My career, my reputation, everything I had built would be gone in an instant.
"Where is he now?"
I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. "He's still in the city, but he's planning something. I don't know what, but he sounded determined." I gripped the phone tighter, my mind racing with possibilities. I had to think fast, to find a way out of this before it was too late. "Listen to me, Sara. We need to contain this.
We can't let him go public.
We need to find him and stop him." Jason, I'm scared, she confessed, her voice breaking. He sounded so angry, so resolute. I don't know what to do. Calm down, I said, though my own heart was pounding in my chest. We'll figure this out. But whatever you do, don't contact him. Don't respond to anything he says. We need to keep control of the situation. Sara agreed, though her fear was palpable through the phone. After hanging up, I stood there on the porch, staring out at the dense woods surrounding the cabin. The serene setting was a stark contrast to the storm brewing within me. The plan that had once seemed so foolproof was now teetering on the edge of disaster. I re-entered the cabin, my mind still reeling. Lauren looked up at me, concern etched on her face. Who was that? It was just work, I lied, forcing a smile. Nothing important. She nodded, clearly still wrapped up in her own turmoil. I could see the doubt in her eyes, the uncertainty that had taken root after our confrontation by the lake. She was fragile, vulnerable, and I knew that any wrong move could push her over the edge. But as much as I wanted to focus on managing Lauren's unraveling, I couldn't ignore the looming threat that Lucas now posed. If he truly knew everything, if he had discovered the depths of my betrayal, then the carefully constructed life I had built was in immediate jeopardy. I needed to act quickly, decisively. Lucas had to be stopped before he could carry out whatever plan he was concocting. The revenge I had so meticulously planned had taken an unexpected turn. And now, the game was no longer about simply destroying Lucas. It was about survival, mine and Sara's. And as I stood there, my mind racing with strategies and contingencies, I realized with a sickening certainty that the final chapter of this saga was about to be written. But whether it would end in my triumph or my downfall was now entirely up to me. The drive back to the city was a blur. I left Lauren at the cabin, telling her I needed to take care of something at work. She didn't question me, perhaps she was too drained from everything that had happened. Or perhaps she simply didn't care anymore. Either way, it was a relief not to have to explain myself as I sped down the winding roads, my thoughts consumed by the looming confrontation with Lucas. Sara's words echoed in my mind, her voice tight with fear. If Lucas had truly pieced together our plan, if he knew the extent of our betrayal, then he wouldn't hesitate to destroy us. I had underestimated him, I realized that now. In my arrogance, I had assumed he was nothing more than a pawn. Easily manipulated and discarded. But Lucas was proving to be far more dangerous than I had anticipated. As I neared the city, I called Sara again, my voice terse and to the point. Where is he? He's at the gallery, she replied, her voice shaky. I don't know what he's planning, but he told me he wanted to meet you there. He said it was time to settle things. My grip tightened on the steering wheel. Did he say anything else? No, Sara said, her voice small. But, Jason, I'm scared. He sounded so different. Like he's ready to do something drastic. We'll handle this, I assured her, though the words felt hollow. Stay where you are. I'll take care of it. I hung up and drove straight to Lucas's gallery, my heart pounding in my chest. The streets were unusually quiet as I approached, the evening casting long shadows across the pavement. I parked a few blocks away and walked the rest of the distance, my mind racing with scenarios, each one more grim than the last. When I reached the gallery, I saw the lights were still on inside, a faint glow spilling out onto the empty sidewalk. The place looked deserted, but I knew better than to let my guard down. I took a deep breath and pushed the door open, the familiar chime echoing through the space. The gallery was empty, the art on the walls casting eerie shadows in the dim light. I stepped inside, every sense on high alert, listening for any sign of movement. The place felt different now, no longer the vibrant, creative space it once was, but rather a tomb, filled with the ghosts of what could have been. Lucas? I called out, my voice cutting through the silence. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of my own breathing. Then, from the back of the gallery, I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate, each one sending a spike of adrenaline through my veins. Lucas emerged from the shadows, his expression unreadable. He looked different from the last time I had seen him, harder, more focused. As if the events of the past few weeks had forged him into something unbreakable. He stood there for a moment, just staring at me, and I could see the storm brewing behind his eyes. "You came," he said finally, his voice calm, almost detached. I nodded, keeping my own voice steady. "I got your message. What do you want, Lucas?" "What do I want?" He let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "What I want, Jason, is to understand. I want to understand why you did it. Why you decided to destroy everything I've worked for." I didn't respond immediately, choosing my words carefully. "You were a threat to my marriage, Lucas. You had an affair with my wife. I couldn't just let that go." "And so you decided to ruin me?" He shot back, his voice rising. "To take everything away from me? My career, my reputation, just because of some stupid affair?" "It wasn't just about the affair," I said, trying to maintain control. "You crossed a line, Lucas. You endangered everything I hold dear. I did what I had to do to protect my life. My family." Lucas shook his head again, his expression one of disbelief. "You're lying, Jason. This wasn't just about your marriage. This was about power, about control. You couldn't stand the thought of someone else having something you didn't. You wanted to crush me, to prove that you're better than me. Isn't that right?" I stared at him, the truth of his words cutting deeper than I cared to admit. There was no point in denying it. The game had been about more than just Lauren. It had been about asserting my dominance. About reminding everyone, including myself, of who held the real power. "So what now?" I asked, my voice cold. "You've figured it out. What do you plan to do about it?" Lucas stepped closer, his eyes never leaving mine. "I'm going to make sure everyone knows what you've done. I'm going to expose you for the manipulative, vindictive bastard you are. You won't just lose your wife, Jason, you'll lose everything." His words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of inevitability. I felt a cold fury rise within me. The realization that I had pushed him too far, that there was no going back now. The confrontation was inevitable, and it would end with one of us in ruins. "And what makes you think anyone will believe you?" I countered, my voice laced with venom. "You're already on the brink of collapse, Lucas. Your gallery is failing, your reputation is in tatters. Who do you think they'll believe, a disgraced artist or a successful architect with everything to lose?" He smiled then, a cold, knowing smile that sent a shiver down my spine. "You underestimate me, Jason. I have nothing left to lose, which makes me dangerous. And you? You have everything to lose, and that makes you vulnerable." We stood there, locked in a silent battle of wills, the tension between us crackling like electricity. This was the moment of truth, the climax of the game we had been playing for weeks. And as I stared into Lucas's eyes, I realized that no matter how this ended, there would be no real winner. The final move was about to be made, and when it was, the world as we knew it would never be the same. The gallery's silence was shattered by the sound of my phone vibrating in my pocket. I ignored it, my eyes locked on Lucas, who stood just a few feet away, his expression a mixture of defiance and determination. I could feel the weight of everything I had done pressing down on me, the enormity of the situation threatening to crush me under its weight. "Go ahead," Lucas said, nodding toward my pocket. "Answer it. Maybe it's someone calling to tell you how your carefully constructed world is falling apart." I shot him a cold glare but pulled out the phone. Sara's name flashed on the screen. I hesitated for a moment before answering, keeping my voice low. "Sara, this isn't a good time." "Jason, it's over," she said, her voice trembling with panic. "Lucas has already leaked everything. It's all over the news. The press, the clients, everyone knows. They're saying you manipulated the gallery, spread lies about him to ruin his career." My heart sank, a cold dread spreading through my chest. I turned to Lucas, who was watching me with a knowing smile. He had already made his move, and I hadn't even seen it coming. "You son of a," I started, but Lucas cut me off. "Save it, Jason. It's too late. You thought you could play God, ruin my life, and walk away unscathed. But now everyone knows what you are, a manipulative, power-hungry bastard who'll do anything to get what he wants." I felt my hands trembling as I clenched them into fists, struggling to maintain some semblance of control.
"You think this is over, Lucas? You think you've won?"
"I don't need to win," he replied, his voice calm and measured. "I just need to make sure you lose." I ended the call with Sara, the reality of the situation sinking in. The leak wasn't just a minor setback, it was the beginning of the end. I could already imagine the fallout, the headlines, the scandal, the clients dropping my firm, the looks of betrayal and disappointment from those who had trusted me. Everything I had worked for, everything I had built, was about to come crashing down around me. "You've ruined yourself too, you know that, right?" I said, trying to find some way to regain the upper hand. "When this is all over, you'll be just as destroyed as I am." "Maybe," Lucas said with a shrug. "But at least I'll have the satisfaction of knowing I took you down with me." His words stung, not because of their truth, but because they reflected the very thing I had feared most, losing control. I had always prided myself on being the one in charge, the one who dictated the terms of every situation. But now, standing here in the ruins of my own making, I realized that control had been nothing more than an illusion. I took a step toward Lucas, my mind racing, trying to find a way out of this mess. But for the first time in my life, I was at a loss. There was no strategy, no clever maneuver that could undo what had been done. The damage was irreversible. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Why did you have to push me this far?" Lucas's eyes softened for a moment, and I saw a flicker of something. Pity, perhaps, or maybe just regret. "You did this to yourself, Jason. All I wanted was to be left alone, to build something of my own. But you couldn't let that happen. You couldn't stand the thought of someone else succeeding where you might fail. This was never about Lauren or Sara or anyone else. This was about your own ego." The words hit harder than any punch could have. I had always considered myself a man of principle, someone who acted out of necessity rather than vanity. But as I stood there, confronted with the wreckage of my life, I realized Lucas was right. My actions had been driven by fear, fear of losing control, fear of being outdone, fear of becoming irrelevant. "What now?" I asked, the fight draining out of me. "Now?" Lucas said, his voice tinged with exhaustion. "Now, we both deal with the consequences of our actions. You'll have to live with what you've done, just as I will." He turned to leave. But before he walked away, he paused and looked back at me. "I never wanted it to end like this, Jason. But sometimes, the only way to break free from someone's grasp is to tear them down." With that, he walked out of the gallery, leaving me standing there alone, surrounded by the remnants of his once vibrant world. The silence that followed was deafening, a stark reminder of everything I had lost. As I stood there, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was an email notification. I opened it to see the headlines already rolling in, each one more damning than the last. My name was being dragged through the mud, my reputation dismantled piece by piece for the world to see. And there, in the center of it all, was the truth I had spent so long avoiding. I had destroyed everything I cared about in my pursuit of power, and now, there was nothing left to save. I sank into a nearby chair, the weight of my actions pressing down on me like a leaden shroud. The collapse was complete, and as the reality of my situation set in, I realized that this was only the beginning. The fallout from this disaster would be long and painful, and I would have to face it alone. For the first time in my life, I had no one to blame but myself. In the days that followed, my life became a series of rapid, disjointed events, each one more humiliating than the last. The news of my actions spread like wildfire, and soon, the whispers of scandal turned into full-blown accusations. Clients started pulling out of projects, business deals that had once seemed secure evaporated overnight. And my once thriving firm began to crumble under the weight of the backlash.
Everywhere I went, I felt the eyes of judgment on me, the silent condemnation of those who had once respected me. It was as if the entire world had turned against me, eager to watch my downfall with a mixture of schadenfreude and disgust.
And in the midst of it all, Lauren was there, her presence a constant reminder of everything I had lost. She didn't say much in those days. In fact, she barely spoke to me at all. But her silence was more telling than any words could have been. It was the silence of someone who had seen the worst of me and had nothing left to say. I could feel her slipping away, and no matter how much I tried to reach out, to apologize, to explain, it was as if I was grasping at air. At home, the tension was unbearable.
We moved around each other like ghosts, two people living in the same house but existing in completely different worlds.
I wanted to ask her what she was thinking, what she was feeling, but I was too afraid of the answer. And so, I kept my distance, watching helplessly as the chasm between us grew wider with each passing day. It wasn't long before the official inquiries began. The art world may have been full of scandals and rivalries, but the accusations against me had taken things to a new level.
Investigators began digging into my past, scrutinizing every decision I had ever made, every deal I had ever struck.
It was as if my entire life was being put on trial. And there was nothing I could do to stop it.
Sara called me a few times during this period, her voice full of worry and regret. She tried to console me, to offer support, but I could tell she was struggling with her own guilt. Our plan had backfired spectacularly, and now, we were both paying the price. She was facing her own fallout. Lucas had cut all ties with her, and the career she had worked so hard to build was hanging by a thread.
"I'm sorry, Jason," she said during one of our late-night conversations.
"I never meant for it to go this far." "Neither did I replied, staring out the window at the city that had once been my kingdom.
"But now we're here, and there's no going back." Lauren wasn't the only one who had withdrawn.
My colleagues, once eager to bask in the glow of my success, now kept their distance, their loyalty evaporating as quickly as my reputation.
Even my closest friends were hesitant to be seen with me, their support conditional on the preservation of their own reputations. I had become a pariah, and the loneliness that accompanied it was suffocating.
But perhaps the most painful part of it all was watching Lucas emerge from the ashes of our confrontation, stronger and more resolute than ever. He had taken everything I had thrown at him and turned it into fuel, using the publicity from the scandal to reinvent himself as a survivor of betrayal.
His gallery, once on the brink of collapse, was now thriving, buoyed by the public's newfound fascination with his story.
He had become the hero of the narrative, the artist who had risen above the treachery of others to reclaim his place in the world.
And there I was, the villain of the story, left to pick up the pieces of a life I had so carelessly shattered.
One evening, as I sat alone in my office, surrounded by the remnants of my once successful firm, Lauren walked in.
She stood in the doorway for a moment, her eyes scanning the room before finally settling on me. "I'm leaving," she said, her voice calm and steady. I looked up at her, the words hitting me like a physical blow. "Lauren, please. I can't do this anymore, Jason," she continued, cutting me off.
"I've tried, but there's nothing left."
"You destroyed everything we had, and I don't know how to forgive you for that." I wanted to argue, to plead with her to stay, but the truth was, I had no right to ask that of her. I had driven her away with my actions, and now, she was simply walking out of the wreckage I had created. "Where will you go?" I asked, my voice breaking. "I don't know," she admitted, a hint of sadness in her eyes.
"But anywhere is better than here."
I watched as she turned to leave, my heart heavy with the realization that I was truly alone now. The door closed behind her with a soft click, the final punctuation to the story of our marriage.
In the silence that followed, I sat there, staring at the empty space where she had stood, my mind numb.
I had always believed that power and control were the most important things in life.
But now, as I sat in the ruins of everything I had built, I realized how wrong I had been.
I had lost my wife, my career, my reputation, everything that had once defined me.
And as I sat there, alone in the darkness, I wondered if there was any way to rebuild from the ashes, or if this was the end of the line. But for now, there was nothing left to do but face the consequences of my actions, to accept the punishment I had brought upon myself.
The world I had known was gone, and in its place was a void.
One that I would have to find a way to fill, if that was even possible. The aftermath was far from over, and the road ahead was uncertain. But as I sat there, I knew one thing for sure: I would never be the same man again. The days blurred together as I tried to find some semblance of normalcy in the chaos that had become my life.
With Lauren gone, the house felt emptier than ever. The once lively spaces now seemed haunted by the memories of what had been, each corner echoing with the absence of her presence. I could hardly bear to be there, but there was nowhere else to go.
The firm had all but collapsed, my name irrevocably tainted, and the career I had spent years building lay in ruins. I spent hours sitting at my desk, staring blankly at my computer screen, wondering how everything had gone so wrong. There was no fixing what I had done, no apology, no amount of remorse could undo the damage. But in the midst of my despair, a small, persistent thought began to take root in my mind.
If this was truly the end of the life I had known,
then perhaps it was also an opportunity to start anew.
It was a painful idea, one that felt almost impossible in my current state, but as the days passed, it grew stronger. I had nothing left to lose, and in that, there was a strange kind of freedom.
If I could no longer be the man I once was, then perhaps I could become something different, someone better.
The first step was to let go of the past. I began by closing down the firm, a decision that was as heartbreaking as it was necessary. There was no point in clinging to a business that had become synonymous with scandal. I sold off the assets, laid off the remaining employees with as much dignity as I could muster, and walked away from the place that had once been the center of my universe.
The house was next.
I couldn't bear to live in the space that had once been our home, filled with memories of a marriage that no longer existed. I put it on the market, and within a few weeks, it was sold. Packing up the last of my things, I felt a strange mix of sorrow and relief, knowing that I was leaving behind not just a physical place, but an entire chapter of my life. With nothing tying me to the city anymore, I decided to leave Los Angeles.
The place that had once represented opportunity and success now felt like a prison, suffocating me with the weight of my past mistakes.
I needed a fresh start, somewhere far from the wreckage I had created. I chose a small town on the coast, a place where I could be anonymous, where no one knew my name or the scandal that had defined my life. It was a quiet, unassuming town, the kind of place where people went to escape, to find peace. I rented a modest house near the beach, the sound of the waves providing a soothing backdrop to the turmoil still churning inside me. For the first few weeks, I did nothing but walk along the shore, letting the ocean breeze clear my mind. It was a slow, agonizing process, but with each passing day, the pain lessened just a little. The guilt and regret were still there, but they no longer consumed me. I began to accept that I couldn't change the past, no matter how much I wanted to. All I could do was move forward. I found work as a consultant, something that allowed me to keep a low profile while still using the skills I had developed over the years.
It wasn't glamorous, and it didn't come with the prestige or power I had once craved, but it was enough.
It allowed me to live simply, to focus on rebuilding myself rather than chasing the elusive goals that had driven me to ruin. It was during this time that I began to rediscover the things that had once brought me joy before ambition had taken over my life. I started sketching again, something I hadn't done since my early days as an architect. It was a way to clear my mind, to express the emotions I had kept bottled up for so long. The lines on the paper were imperfect, but they were mine, and that was enough. I also began to connect with the people in the town, slowly at first, but with growing confidence. They didn't know who I was, and I was in no hurry to tell them. For the first time in years, I was just Jason, not the successful architect, not the man embroiled in scandal, just a person trying to find his way again. One day, as I was sitting on the beach, sketchbook in hand, an older man approached me. He had a kind face, weathered by years of sun and salt, and he carried a surfboard under one arm.
"Mind if I sit?"
he asked, nodding toward the sand next to me. "Not at all," I replied, moving my things aside to make room. He settled down with a contented sigh, looking out at the ocean.
"You're new around here, aren't you?"
I nodded. "Yeah, just moved here a few months ago.
"Needed a change of scenery."
"Smart move," he said with a grin.
"This place has a way of healing people, if you let it."
We talked for a while, about the town, about life, about nothing in particular.
His name was Roy, and he had lived in the town for most of his life, running a small surf shop down by the pier.
There was a simplicity to him, a calmness that I found reassuring. He didn't ask about my past, and I didn't offer any details.
It was enough just to sit and talk, to feel a connection to another human being. As the sun began to set, Roy stood up, brushing the sand off his pants. "You should stop by the shop sometime," he said, gesturing to the board in his hand.
"I could teach you how to surf, if you're interested. It's a great way to clear your head." I smiled, the idea appealing in a way I hadn't expected. "Maybe I will."
He gave me a nod and walked away, leaving me alone with my thoughts once more. But this time, they were different. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a glimmer of hope, a sense that maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward. As I watched the waves crash against the shore, I realized that my life wasn't over, it was just beginning again, in a new way. The path ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, I was okay with that.
I had lost everything, but in the process, I had found something far more valuable, the chance to rebuild, to start over, to become someone better.
And in that moment, I knew that no matter what the future held, I would face it with a renewed sense of purpose, ready to embrace whatever came next. The weeks that followed were marked by a quiet but steady transformation. My life in the small town began to take on a rhythm, one that was far removed from the chaos and ambition that had once defined me.
I found solace in the simplicity of my new existence. The slow pace allowing me to reflect on the man I had been and the man I was trying to become. I took Roy up on his offer and started spending time at his surf shop. At first, I was hesitant, unsure of how I would fit into this new world of surfboards and ocean waves. But Roy was patient, guiding me through the basics with a mixture of encouragement and humor. He treated me like an equal, never prying into my past or asking questions I wasn't ready to answer. Instead, he focused on the here and now, teaching me how to balance on the board, how to read the waves, and most importantly, how to let go of the tension I had carried for so long. Surfing became a kind of therapy, a way to connect with the natural world and, in a way, with myself. Out on the water, everything else fell away, the mistakes, the regrets, the shame. There was only the ocean and the challenge of riding its waves. I wasn't very good at first, but with each attempt, I improved. I began to understand the ebb and flow of the water, learning to move with it rather than fight against it. As I spent more time on the beach, I started to notice the subtle changes in my outlook. The anger that had once fueled me had begun to dissipate, replaced by a growing sense of acceptance. I couldn't change what had happened, but I could choose how to move forward. It was a lesson that had taken me far too long to learn, but now that I had, it felt like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. Roy and I grew closer during this time, our friendship deepening as we shared more about our lives. He had his own share of regrets and failures, but he had found a way to make peace with them. His stories were full of wisdom, hard-earned through years of living a life that wasn't always easy. He didn't offer advice so much as perspective, gently nudging me to find my own path forward. "You can't undo what's been done," he told me one evening as we sat around a small fire on the beach, the sun dipping below the horizon. "But you can decide what you do next." Life's too short to live in the past, Jason. Trust me, I know. His words resonated with me, more than I cared to admit. I realized that I had been holding onto my past mistakes as if they defined me, letting them dictate my every thought and action. But now, as I sat there with Roy, watching the last rays of sunlight fade away, I began to see that maybe, just maybe, I could let go. One morning, after an early surf session, I was sitting on the beach, my board resting beside me, when I noticed a familiar figure walking along the shoreline. It was Lauren. She hadn't changed much since the last time I had seen her, still the same graceful walk, the same confident posture. But there was something different in her expression, something softer, more reflective. She spotted me and hesitated for a moment before walking over. "Jason," she said, her voice tinged with surprise. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I could say the same," I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral. She sat down beside me, and for a few moments, we just watched the waves in silence. It was strange, being so close to her after everything that had happened. The last time we had spoken, our words had been filled with anger and pain. But now, there was a calmness between us, as if the time apart had given us both a chance to heal. "I heard you moved here," she said finally. I wasn't sure if it was true. "Yeah, I needed a change. A fresh start." She nodded, her gaze still fixed on the ocean. "I know the feeling." There was another pause, longer this time, as if we were both searching for the right words. Finally, she turned to face me, her eyes full of something I hadn't seen in a long time, understanding. "I came to say that I'm sorry, Jason. For everything. I know we both made mistakes, and I don't think either of us handled things the way we should have. But I wanted you to know that I've forgiven you. And I hope, one day, you can forgive yourself too." Her words hit me harder than I expected, and for a moment, I couldn't speak. All the anger and bitterness I had held onto for so long seemed to melt away in the face of her forgiveness. It was as if a dam had broken, releasing the flood of emotions I had kept bottled up for so long. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "That means more to me than you know." She smiled, a small, sad smile, and stood up. "I should go. I just wanted to see how you were doing." "I'm okay," I said, and for the first time, I truly meant it. She gave me one last look, a mixture of sadness and something like hope, before turning and walking away, leaving me alone on the beach once again. But this time, the loneliness wasn't overwhelming. It was a peaceful solitude, a moment of clarity that I hadn't experienced in a long time. As I watched her disappear into the distance, I felt a strange sense of closure. It wasn't a happy ending, life rarely offers those, but it was a step toward something better. I knew I still had a long way to go, but for the first time in what felt like forever, I was ready to take that journey. The past would always be a part of me, but it no longer had to define me. I had made mistakes, terrible, life-altering mistakes, but I was still here, still standing, still capable of change. And as I stood up, picking up my board and heading back toward the surf shop, I felt a sense of resolve I hadn't felt in years. This was my chance to start over, to build a life that was worth living. It wouldn't be easy, and the road ahead would undoubtedly be filled with challenges. But I was ready to face them, to take each day as it came, and to finally, truly, move forward. And with that thought, I walked into the waves, letting the ocean wash over me, ready to begin again. Months had passed since that encounter with Lauren, and I had fully settled into my new life in the coastal town. The anger, regret, and guilt that had once consumed me were now distant memories, replaced by a calm acceptance of the past and a quiet determination to keep moving forward. My days were simple, surfing in the mornings, consulting work in the afternoons, and evenings spent either sketching or enjoying the company of the few friends I'd made in town. Roy chief among them. One evening, as the sun dipped low on the horizon, casting the sky in shades of orange and pink, I found myself on the beach once again, my surfboard under my arm. The ocean was calm, the waves gentle, as if inviting me to take one last ride before the day ended. I paddled out, feeling the cool water against my skin, the familiar rhythm of the ocean beneath me.
As I reached the spot where the waves began to rise, I paused, taking in the view.
The sun was almost touching the water now,
casting a golden path across the surface.
It was a moment of perfect stillness, a brief pause before the inevitable movement forward. I caught the next wave, letting it carry me toward the shore. The ride was smooth, effortless, and as I glided across the water, I felt a deep sense of peace. This was where I belonged, in the moment, fully present, free from the burdens of the past. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I wasn't thinking about what had been or what could have been. I was simply here, in the now, and that was enough. As the wave carried me closer to the shore, I realized that this wasn't just the end of another day, it was the end of a chapter in my life. The mistakes I had made, the people I had hurt, the life I had lost, they were all part of a story that had shaped me, but they no longer defined me. I had spent so long trying to atone for my sins, to make amends for the things I couldn't change, but now, I saw that forgiveness, true forgiveness, had to come from within. The wave began to taper off, gently depositing me back onto the beach. I stepped off my board, the sand cool beneath my feet as I walked up the shore. The sun had finally dipped below the horizon, the last rays of light fading into the darkening sky. As I stood there, watching the day turn into night, I felt a sense of closure wash over me. The journey I had been on, the mistakes, the lessons, the growth, had led me to this moment. It hadn't been an easy path, and there were still scars that would never fully heal. But I had found something far more valuable than the success and recognition I had once craved. I had found myself, and in doing so, I had found peace. I picked up my board and began the walk back to the surf shop, the stars starting to twinkle overhead. As I approached the shop, I saw Roy sitting on the porch, a beer in hand, a knowing smile on his face. "How was it?" he asked as I set my board down beside the door. "Perfect," I replied, taking a seat next to him. We sat in comfortable silence for a while. The sound of the waves in the distance, the cool breeze carrying the scent of the ocean. There was no need for words. We both knew that this was the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. "I'm proud of you, Jason," Roy said after a while, his voice quiet but filled with sincerity. "You've come a long way." "Thanks, Roy," I said, feeling a lump form in my throat. "I couldn't have done it without you." He shook his head. "You did the hard work, kid. I just pointed you in the right direction." We clinked our bottles together, a simple toast to the journey we had both been on. As I took a sip of my beer, I looked out at the ocean, the moon now casting its light on the water. Tomorrow would be another day, with its own challenges and opportunities, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't worried about what the future held. I knew that whatever came next, I was ready for it. Because I had finally learned that life wasn't about perfection, or success, or even redemption, it was about acceptance. Accepting who I was, flaws and all, and finding peace in the knowledge that I had done my best to move forward. And with that, I smiled, feeling truly content for the first time in years. The past was behind me, and the future was wide open, waiting for me to make of it what I would.